If you're an aspiring photographer, someone that wants to make money in photography or as a content creator and want to take your skill to the next level, I do not recommend the Fuji X100. I wanted to make a short video about the Fuji X100, the original one, and why I sold it. I recently took a 2-week trip and had the camera with me everywhere for these past 2 weeks. Once I got to the studio, I sold the camera. It's not because the camera wasn't good. It was a great camera, great handling, great feel in hand. The images were okay, but what I realized carrying the camera every day for 2 weeks is that you kind of get tired of the feel of the Fuji, even though it's very organic. It looks great. It looks retro. I got the hand grip. I had the whole red button thing. But when it comes down to it, as a photographer, as someone that creates content, you want a camera that works and creates beautiful images rather than the street photography, documentary style of an amateur photographer or just someone that is an enthusiast, even though a highly advanced one. Even though it's a great camera for vacations, on my next vacations, I would rather take the Sony A7R III, the 4. The feel isn't that great. The battery life isn't that great. You have to really rig it up with a V-mount or a base plate to get more battery. And that kind of takes away from all the pleasure. I love the feel of the Fuji, but I like something with more dynamic range. I had previously owned the Fuji X100F and the S, and I wanted to see if the original is just as good or even better, because I wanted to see if the hype was real. Because what you see on YouTube a lot is a lot of people saying the Fuji X100 and especially the V is the greatest for street photography, documentary, travel photography. I mean, there are better cameras. I mean, you can buy a Leica Q or the Q2, but I personally don't have that kind of money to spend on a travel camera. And I would rather get the Sony A7R II. Where I live, the X100V is around 1,200 euros. For that kind of money, you can get the Sony A7R II. You have a crop sensor versus a full frame sensor. The comparison isn't really fair, but I would rather spend the money on a second-hand A7R II than a brand new Fuji X100V. The Fuji isn't really suited for me. When I said I'm not gonna buy one, it's not because the camera is bad. The whole lineup is good if you're into that street photography, documentary style, travel photography. You have a nice camera that looks great, it looks vintage, it looks really great for Instagram. But what I do with my images is I edit them a lot, and I'm used to working in a studio. I shot a couple of times with the Fuji X100V. I really wasn't impressed with the results. So for that amount of money, I would rather buy a second-hand Sony than a new Fuji. It's not to say that the camera is bad. It's just not suited for my needs. Now, having had both the X100, the original one, and the X100F, I kind of feel like both kind of have the same specs, 12 megapixels, 16, up until the X100V that has 26, I think. They all kind of have that low range sensor size. The feel is kind of the same. The images are similar. And because I'm used to working in the studio and I'm used to working with Sonys and Canons a lot, it doesn't really fit my needs. And I doubt I will ever own a Fuji camera again. What I will say about the Fuji is that it's unique, it looks great, the film simulation is great, it has an ND filter built in. If you buy the thumb grip and you, rig it out with a strap and the whole red button thing, it looks great. It's a fun camera, nice to use, it looks amazing, it looks better than the Sony. but the autofocus, especially on the previous models, is a pain to work with. When it comes to the battery life, it's not that good. Well, to be fair, the battery life is not that good on the Sony either, no matter what the model is. I like the focal length of the Fuji. You have the 28 millimeters in crop mode. It's not that sharp, not as sharp as I would expect an image to be. But when it comes down to it, considering you're going to pay €1,000 for a camera, if you're an aspiring photographer, someone that wants to make money in photography or as a content creator and want to take your skill to the next level, I do not recommend the Fuji X100. I would rather spend the money on an A7R II. I doubt you're gonna afford the A7R III, but the R2 is a 42 megapixel full frame camera that takes amazing images. Compare that to the Fuji X100V. I think it's better for a professional photographer or someone that is aspiring to be a professional photographer. The Fuji is more for a passionate street photographer, a documentary photographer, or just someone that likes to make pictures while they travel. Someone that, has an Instagram profile for traveling or vlogs or whatever. I don't recommend it for a professional because there are more minuses than plus. Okay, it looks great, it feels great, but when it comes down to it, you want to take amazing pictures, not just take Instagram pictures of you holding the camera. Your clients are going to appreciate your pictures and the content you provide for them, not the fact you look good on Instagram. What I pay for the original Fuji X100 is like €300. There's no way you can get a Sony for that kind of money, not a full frame one. If you want to experiment, get a nice travel camera, something that looks good, or you're just starting out, the Fuji is great. Once you go up in price range, once you hit that €500, my advice would be to forget about the Fuji and go straight for the Sony. Even the A7R, the original one, a 36 megapixel full frame camera that beats Fuji any day. If you want to take professional photography, if you want to be a content creator. If you're just traveling, you're a street photographer, you're just an enthusiast, I get it. You want to feel good, you want to look good while doing it, I get it. I'm used to working my cameras. I mean, if it's dust, rain, my cameras work for me. I see the Fuji as an enthusiast camera. After a few days, I started not really enjoying the feel of the camera, but really working the camera, having the camera work for me, and started seeing the minuses it brings. It looks good, it feels good, the film simulations are amazing, but I want shallow depth of field. I don't want the focus to be a headache. I don't want the lens flare all the time. The X100, the original one, had the worst battery life ever. The S, the T, the F, even the X100V, I'm sure they improved that. But for a professional, that just doesn't work. You can really feel the minuses as you start working with the camera. And you want something that works for you, not against you. Now, I took this camera everywhere for the past 2 weeks. Sun, rain, dust, sand. I even took it in neck-deep waters just to take some pictures. Now, once I got over the pleasure of shooting with the Fuji, I had the hand grip, I had the whole strap with the red knob thing. It looked amazing. But once you start using it, you get past that. Once you appreciate the camera as like a vintage old camera that you look great using, you start quickly wanting something to work for you. And I think the Fuji is not really a workhorse for a photographer. Street photography, documentary, travel photography, it looks great, it feels great, it does what it's supposed to for an amateur photographer. But once you go up the ranks and start making money with your camera, I think the Fuji, even the latest one, the X100V, it's not as good for you, and you start having this need to graduate to something like the Sony A7R II. Again, if you're starting out and you have 2, 3, 400 euros or even $300, the Fuji X100 is great for you. But once you graduate to making money with your images as a photographer, content creator, you want a camera that you can rely on. And there's no beating the A7R or the A7R II when it comes to image quality. It's a full frame sensor, so the comparison isn't really fair. But what I'm saying is, if I had $1,000 to spend, I would not get the Fuji X100V. I would get a used A7R II, because that's a camera that is a workhorse.